Civil asset forfeiture is theft, and government is nothing more than a mafia in the limit, effectively operating as nothing more than a corporation in the most vast extent possible. What we see is the racketeering scheme that is either taxes, inflation, or civil asset forfeiture only seems to scale upward, and we see people continue to be ground ever further into the dirt. Let's go ahead and jump in and explain what civil asset forfeiture is, as well as the problem of why it's such an issue when it comes to the nature of government having another subtle encroachment on pushing your rights and taking your property. This is from the Washington Post, and with it, we see that this article is written in 2015. So it's talking about the year 2014. Let's go ahead and put that as some context. Law enforcement took more stuff from people than burglars did last year. Asset forfeiture surpassed burglaries, total annual dollar values of assets seized by federal law enforcement and burglary losses. You can go ahead and see by this chart, it goes by the point of a decade from 2004 to 2014. The scale that it goes up to the point of is $5 billion, with asset forfeiture climaxing that of what burglaries had hit and even going past it to create a new height. Well, I have a question. If government has grown exponentially, meaning its costs have grown exponentially, and that also means that the scale of its incompetence will have expanded vastly with that exponential growth rate, do you actually believe that less people are being having their assets seized by the government today than they even were in 2014? No, of course not. Let's go ahead and see. Here's an interesting factoid about contemporary policy. Well, policing. In 2014, for the first time ever, law enforcement officers took more property from American citizens than burglars did. Martin Armstrong pointed this out as his blog, Armstrong Economics, last week. Officers can take cash and property from people without convicting or even charging them with a crime. Yes, really, this is true. Though the highly controversial practice known as civil asset forfeiture, or it says through the highly controversial practice known as civil asset forfeiture. Last year, according to the Institute of Justice, the Treasury and Justice Departments deposited more than $5 billion into their respective asset forfeiture funds. That same year, the FBI reports that burglary losses topped out at $3.5 billion. Armstrong claims that police are now taking more assets than criminals. Well, isn't that just fascinating? And it goes on to say the fact that, well, no, this isn't actually technically true, but it doesn't really bolster it all that well. The article will be linked in the description down below if you'd like to go in it and debunk me and tell me where I'm wrong if you go through it. Let's go ahead and jump into something from the Mises Institute. And if you want some incredibly well-written articles, great place to go get proper books to understand libertarian theory, how this policy would be applied, the understanding of the fundamentals, where it comes from, who the grounding creators of these ideas are. This is a great place to go. Let's go ahead and jump into this. Civil asset forfeiture, another stealth tax. Man, the Mises Institute doesn't miss. Please go give them a follow. When you're a government agency, asking for a tax increase is always a hassle. For the most part, taxpayers don't like taxes, and if they're asked if they want to pay more, they often say no. Shocker, I know. Moreover, when public officials pass tax increases, they may face the wrath of taxpayers at the ballot box. For this reason, governments are always looking for ways to get revenue without having to use tax revenue. After all, if taxes are the government's only source of revenue, this presents a problem, as noted by Ludwig von Mises in Omnipotent Government. The government has but one source of revenue, taxes. No taxation is legal without parliamentary consent, but if the government has other sources of income, it can free itself from this control. And one of these other sources of income is the so-called inflation tax, which governments can create more money for themselves by simply creating it. The tax then falls on the public, which is left holding the devalued currency. If you've watched anything from my channel before and you've heard anything I've had to say, you've probably heard me spew about inflation and complain about economic policy and monetary policy and MMT. All right, let's move on. This is, as Ludwig von Mises noted, essentially undemocratic since it's an attempt to make an end run around the voters and obtain more revenue without having to go through the trouble of raising taxes honestly and out in the open. Another method of seizing wealth from the taxpayers is what's now called civil asset forfeiture. This occurs when law enforcement agencies seize assets, including real estate, cars, cash, and other valuables, from private citizens based merely on the suspicion that the person has committed a crime with the assets in question. No due process is necessary, no conviction, and a court of law need occur. And I know this sounds ridiculous, and it sounds farcical, and it sounds like it's not true, but it's absolutely real. It is minority report levels of insane. While it is technically possible to sue a government agency to reclaim one's possessions, this requires immense amounts of time and legal fees to pursue. And let's go ahead and jump into the idea of we're all equal under the law. And what that is the myth of objective law. We are not actually all equal under the law if I can bleed you dry with lawyers' fees and then also run smear campaigns to destroy you in the court of public opinion. Alrighty. While it is technically possible to sue a government agency or reclaim one's possessions, this requires immense amounts of time and legal fees, as we've said. Needless to say, civil asset forfeiture has become a lucrative source of income for law enforcement agencies, and over the past 30 years, the practice has become widespread. Tate Fegley writes, similar to how income tax has become the primary source of funding for the federal government, many police departments have become dependent on civil asset forfeiture to pay their budgets. In a survey, 1,400 county sheriffs and municipal police departments, 40% of responding agencies agree that forfeiture provides a necessary budgetary supplement. And here's the deal. If you have to expand the degree of what you're doing to incorporate 40% more theft from the people that you're supposed to be protecting, then I would argue we need a drastic reduction in the scale of what your organization is doing. Don't even get me started on what should happen with police and privatizing those institutions. I'm going to move on before I go on an entirely different segue that doesn't have to do with this. Fortunately, many taxpayers and reformers have begun to demand change to their policies and require that property can only be seized if it is accused and is actually convicted of a crime. And that's absolutely how it should be. They shouldn't be able to walk in and steal some kid's money who's been saving $5,000 and putting it in a shoebox to go ahead and put it towards this car, but they've ended up correlating him with the wrong person because they racially profiled him, and now they're saying, oh, look at this person who has all this drug money, we're going to go ahead and take that. And now you've ruined this person's capacity to move upward through the economic ladder because you're strip mining them of their wealth, putting them further deeper in a hole, one, making them hate the police even more, which you would assume these people don't want to do. And if you're a cop and you want to protect the citizenry, why would you want to take the citizenry's own assets if you're trying to protect them, which means you would want to also protect their property? But no, no, no. We don't have that. We just have cops trying to meet their 20. All right. In recent years, New Mexico and Nebraska have enacted sweeping reforms to the system. Other milder but significant reforms have also been adopted in Maryland, Florida, Minnesota, and Montana. Not surprisingly, law enforcement agencies have often opposed the reforms tooth and nail. Moreover, in New Mexico, many municipal governments simply continue to seize assets, claiming the state law did not apply to them. And if you haven't seen anything of what was going on recently with the tyrannical structure of New Mexico's governor, well, go ahead and look right up here. I will link the video so you can go ahead and watch what was going on with how they were attacking the Second Amendment, and what I would argue is the most brazen call out and debauchery against the Second Amendment and the Bill of Rights that I've logistically ever seen since, I would argue, shit, I don't even know, Donald Trump when he pushed the bump stock ban. Even when the reforms are extremely mild, as in the case with recently passed legislation in Colorado, local governments and law enforcement agencies are demanding the governor veto the reform legislation already passed by the legislature. Alrighty, well, here's the deal. Looking at government protests to reform one, we will notice that the common denominator, civil asset forfeiture, is also about enhancing the revenue of local governments and local law enforcement agencies. Virtually ignored is the fact that these revenues are obtained by seizing the property of innocent people. We know that they're innocent because nationwide, an overwhelming majority of seizure victims were never actually brought up on any criminal charges, which means we are stealing from innocent people. We're going to go ahead and throw it into another article, this one from Forbes, talking about the problem with the issue of police stealing from people, and then we're going to go into one about the stories of people that have these tragedies with civil asset forfeiture. Let's go. From Forbes, we see new proof that police use civil forfeiture to take from those who can't fight back. And is this honestly a surprise to anyone? I would argue that if it is, you need to remove the rose-tinted glasses that you look at cops with and realize these are the same people that are taking top-down orders from superstructures that completely defy the ethos of the Constitution that they are meant to uphold. These are also the same individuals that will remove a child from their lemonade stand because they do not have a permit to run it. Keep that in mind. How much would you have to be paid to go walk up to a child and tell them you need to shut down this lemonade stand because you're not paying the government their fair due? Nasir Gager spoke with the wrong person at the wrong time, and it cost him hundreds of dollars in his car. Nasir was a victim of Philadelphia's predatory civil forfeiture scheme that operated from a shady courtroom at City Hall. For years, police and prosecutors seized cars, cash, and even homes, then took property for themselves. Worse still, new data shows the police preyed on people in the minority and low-income areas, in other words, people who could least afford to fight back. And is this honestly a surprise to anyone? Nasir's troubles began when he stopped to say hello to a friend at McDonald's in Northeast Philly. What Nasir didn't know was that the friend had just been arrested for drug possession. A few minutes after ending the conversation and driving away, Nasir was pulled over, his car was searched, and although no drugs or even drug residue were found, the officers seized the car and $580 cash, because that's where they found the empty Ziploc bags Wow, you had empty Ziploc bags. What a threat. We're gonna have to go ahead and steal your car and your money from you now, bro. The police gave Nasir a receipt for only $465 rather than the full amount taken and no receipt for his car. Nasir's court appointed attorney recommended that he take a plea deal that would result in a clear record if he paid a $200 fine and completed 20 hours of community service. So listen, I know you didn't do anything wrong, but we're gonna need you to pay this fine and also do 20 hours of community service. Unbelievable. The plea deal didn't include the government taking his car or his cash, so Nasir thought he would get both back. He was wrong. Instead, prosecutors filed for civil asset forfeiture actions to be taken against his property. They almost certainly would not have been able to claim his car or his cash through a criminal trial, since the supposed offense carried such a light punishment, but in civil forfeiture, the property, not the person, is on trial. Is that not the stupidest thing you've ever heard? Unbelievable. Let's go ahead and jump into this, and what we see is this is from American Prosperity, and it's talking about civil asset forfeiture and the horrors of it and the process of it, and there's 7 stories that will be told. I'm not sure if we'll be going through every single one, but if you would like to go through the ones that I may not go over, you're more than welcome to go in the link in the description, click on it, read it for yourself, and go over it. All right, let's go. Civil asset forfeiture. 7 horror stories. Americans for Prosperity is working to reform the nation's asset forfeiture laws, which often permit law enforcement to seize and forfeit private property from individuals without ever charging them with a crime. It is almost in all jurisdictions when law enforcement does take ownership of a person's property, they get to keep most or all of the proceeds. This system creates a perverse incentive for police to seize assets rather than focus on solving crime and serving the public. Even when utilized to the best of its intentions, the system is prone to abuse and innocent people have been needlessly victimized by it. Consider just a few of the many civil asset forfeiture horror stories. Let's go check them out. South Carolina's Mike Albin's RV. In 2009, Mike Albin, a 65-year-old Vietnam veteran, cancer patient, and restaurant owner, residing in an RV in the parking lot of his workplace. State law enforcement began an undercover gambling investigation of his restaurant and purchased a small amount of marijuana from a cook. Based on that purchase and the presence of 9 video poker machines at the restaurant, police searched Albin's RV and recovered 4 ounces of marijuana. This was below the legal threshold in permitting the seizure of a vehicle, but law enforcement argued that the RV was actually a container. They seized the RV and sold it at an auction. That's unbelievable. That's like if you had someone come into your home and they had found drugs and the police were like, all right, you know what? We found these drugs, but you know what? It was within the household, and this person had 2 grams of marijuana within this 2,000 square foot home. So realistically, it was contained within it. So that's the container, and we're gonna have to go ahead and steal your house, bro. Unbelievable. Albin passed away in 2012 shortly after the state appeals court ruled the seizure invalid. His $30,000 in attorney's fees were never covered, and his estate received less than they believed the RV was worth. In Alabama, Frank Ranelli's computer repair shop. In 2010, Frank Ranelli owned his Inslee, Alabama computer repair shop for more than 20 years. One morning, his business was raided by police and more than 130 computers were confiscated. Some were for sale, some were undergoing repairs, and some were supposed to be returned to their owners. Police were acting on an informant's tip that Ranelli was receiving stolen goods, but the charge was dropped when Ranelli said he had followed proper protocol in the case of the only laptop he had accused of receiving illegally. Ranelli spent years unsuccessfully trying to recover the confiscated property. In North Carolina, Lyndon McKellen's entire bank account was seized. Lyndon McKellen owned a convenience store in rural Fairmont, North Carolina. His business was mostly in cash, and he regularly made large legal cash deposits. On the advice of a bank teller, most of his deposits were in amounts of less than $10,000 to reduce paperwork. Under the federal law, this practice is legal as long as the deposits are not structured this way to avoid the reporting requirements and conceal criminal activity. Because McKellen was not attempted to evading these requirements, he believed that he was following the law. The federal government disagreed. In 2014, the Department of Justice obtained a court order to seize more than $107,000 from his account. As McKellen said, it took me 13 years to save up that much money, and in 13 seconds for the government to take it away from me. The case was eventually dropped. McKellen's funds were returned to him in 2015. In 2016, a federal judge awarded him legal fees as well. And that's absolutely fantastic that he ended up getting his money back. We're going to go ahead and jump into the last one that we will be covering in Wyoming. Phil something something's recording studio, because I'm not going to say that because I'm not going to butcher it. In March 2017, Phil was pulled over in Larimer County, Wyoming for an improper seatbelt usage and apparent lane violation. The police officer was able to get I'm not going to butcher that, I'm not even going to try, to consent to a search of his car, which contained years of his life savings, more than $91,000 stashed in a speaker, which he intended to spend fulfilling a lifelong dream, the purchase of a Madison, Wisconsin studio where Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins had played. He was allowed to leave if he had signed a waiver giving up the cash, which he did. He was no criminal, and he had no criminal record, which meant he had never been charged with any crime, only a $25 ticket. His cash was eventually returned, and the story spurred the Wyoming state to reform the state's civil asset forfeiture laws. And that's genuinely incredible. And here we see Jerry Johnson's third rig, and that's talking about them stealing someone's rig, like their truck that they drive around. I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. This is genuinely criminal. Civil asset forfeiture is absolutely heinous, and the fact that police officers feel they have the moral high ground to go ahead and steal your property and then act as if they are the good people in society that are the ones protecting you because they're nothing more than the benevolent good guys, that's a load of bullshit. Take off the rose-tinted glasses when it comes to cops. Realize they're nothing more than the teeth of the state, and without people actually giving them the authority to pierce you at every single end with the pressure of government, they would be nothing more than average individuals who are seen to be the C students that they are. I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. Thanks for watching if you got this far. Thumbs up if you liked it. Thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Do you actually think civil asset forfeiture isn't theft? Thanks for watching. Stay lovely. Stay great. Peace out.